Today with Claire Byrne on RTE Radio 1.
Dr. David Coleman is in our Limerick studio, and today, David, we're talking about talking to children about bereavement and how to support them through grief. And we've asked Olive Foley to come on with you today, David, and listeners will remember that Olive was widowed in 2016 when her husband Anthony Foley, then the Munster rugby head coach, died suddenly in Paris. Good morning to you, Olive.
Good morning, Claire. How are you?
Thanks very much for joining us. And you're an ambassador for the Limerick Children's Grief Centre, which is run by Sister Helen Culhane. But when Anthony died so suddenly, one of the first people you phoned was David Coleman.
It was, yeah. I mean, not everybody who loses their husband has David Coleman's number on their phone, and so that is something that I was very lucky to have. He plays bridge with my mother. So, sorry, David.
You're quite all right, Olive. The truth will out. My bridge playing is public knowledge.
So you were known to each other, and he was one of the first people that you went to, Olive.
Mm-hmm. He was, I think. I mean, the details around what happened that day are still a little bit vague, but as far as I remember, it was the following morning that I rang David, because I just suppose I wanted I wanted somebody to kind of give me a bit of a lead on, and I knew that he'd know what advice to give me. And so I just rang him and said, what will I do? And so we went through the details of what I had to do at that stage. We were organising to get a flight over to Paris to bring Anthony home, and that was the first piece of advice. He said, include the children in that trip. If you can bring them to Paris, bring them and include them. You know, we're child appropriate, obviously, but include them in every aspect of that funeral. Tell them everything. Don't keep anything from them.
So can I ask you, prior to that conversation with David, was your intention not to bring the boys with you to Paris?
I don't think I even knew what I was doing at that stage, because I was in such shock, and I was so I suppose grief-ridden that I probably didn't know. I think I was ringing David for him to tell me what to do.
Yeah, to give you instructions. There's an instruction manual of what's one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
And David, why was that piece of advice, I don't know if you can remember giving that advice to Olive, but why was it so important to include the boys in that trip?
So I think, Olive has described herself, even just that whole shock, and how unbelievable the situation seems. And I think, that shock is going to be there for children too. And I think elements of being included in the funeral. Irish people generally are great when it comes to marking deaths with funerals and wakes and so on. And I think what that does is it allows everybody at some level to acknowledge the passing of the person. It allows people to acknowledge the loss, and it makes it a little bit real. So, not every child is necessarily going to want to or needs to see, for example, a body in a casket. But, for some children, that allows them to know that this person isn't just sleeping, that this person is actually dead. And so that's, often we use euphemisms as well to try and describe death to children, and sometimes they're not very helpful, because, if you say, look, they've gone to sleep now and they'll be asleep forever, for a child that could be terrifying, the thought that they could also go to sleep and be asleep forever. And so using words like death and that they have died can be really important. But that's what including them in the early stages of preparations, even for funeral masses and so on, is just really helpful for them in that first stage of acknowledging this has actually happened.
And, given that this was such a shock, Olive, just thinking about it again, it was a shock for those of us who didn't know you and your family, so can't imagine what you were going through and trying to protect your boys, who were only 8 and 11 at the time, but you had the good sense to seek out the help.
I did. I always say that I was never afraid to ask for help. So, my mother came here that morning and told me, she was the one that had to tell me that she had died, and I said straight away, I want a priest, I want my friends, and I need my sister and my family. And so called everybody around, and I'm still seeking help from all of them. So then I suppose that led me on to find Sister Helen Culhane in the Children's Grief Centre, a place I'd never heard of. And it was just in my situation. The principal of the school where the kids were in, the Killu Boys National School, he had contacted Sister Helen in the grief centre and sought help he needed himself to deal with. We were a small school, and I suppose Anthony was known by almost every parent and almost every kid in that school. He'd be coaching them, he'd be helping them down the hurling field, so they all knew him. So I suppose he wanted to know how to, in the school itself, actually how to deal with the death. So then when I brought my kids back to school 2 or 3 weeks later, he had introduced me to Sister Helen, and from there on in, our relationship has blossomed.
Yeah, and you're very involved now with the centre.
Yeah. So Helen asked me about a year into it. The kids have started to go there, and they found great solace, and it really helped them kind of navigate the whole thing and help them with their grief. And then about a year later, Helen just asked me would I be interested in coming in and working as ambassador with her. So I was so happy to be able to give something back, because she really, really, really helped me, and it was lovely to be able to give back. So as ambassador, I just highlight the work that the centre do and promote the centre and help with fundraising. It's volunteer led, so fundraising is a big part of my role.
Just one of the things that you did, Olive, which really strikes me, Anthony had written a book, and you used that book to read it to the children at night. And how helpful was that to them and for you?
They absolutely loved that book. It was something that I wouldn't have even entered my head to ever give them or let them read. That book was written, I think, before Dan was born, and Tony might have been 2 or 3 or that. And that book had been put away, and if the truth is known, I hadn't even read the book. I was very involved in the book as being written, and Peter O'Reilly was ghostwriter for Anthony at that time, so he used to come here and would go through the details of all the stories he had. But then after Anthony died, I had this brainwave. I took out the book, and the kids were fascinated. So every night I'd read a few pages, and they were so excited about this. They learned things, and then they'd ask me 100 questions then about who's this and who's that and what match was that. Or, so they loved it. They got such a kick out of it. So it's being put away again now, so it might come out for another generation.
I'm sure it will. And David, that's an invaluable tool that not everybody will have, but keeping the memory of the person alive is something that everyone can do.
For sure, and you find again, that's a comment people will often make around the time of funerals, and so, many of us who pass through, the line up through the church or the funeral home to, pass on our condolences, and yet so many anecdotes get told, even in those brief few seconds or a minute. Everybody has a little memory, and that's really powerful, especially for children. So not all children are obviously going to be part of necessarily that line, receiving line, but at the same time, to hear some of those stories and to hear those stories back at the house and at wakes and so on, it's just great for children, because it allows them to connect to their, in this case, with Anthony, obviously a parent, but anybody who they were close to, whether it be a granny, granddad, it just allows them to connect to other aspects of the person that they didn't know, and that can help them then in their broader understanding, and also just allow them to again acknowledge what they've lost and who they've lost in this.
It just highlights again, Olive, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, how difficult it must be for people going through bereavement now, that all of those rituals are more or less gone.
Yeah, I find that really sad. That people they cannot have that support. You literally cannot have people in your house, so it's actually heartbreaking. And I suppose that's going to present itself at some stage. We see it with the Children's Grief Centre as well. All the children that have lost grandparents, that they've lost family members, and have not had that real strong support that they need of family and of community, and even the ritual of that funeral. It's so special to give your loved one a proper send off. So maybe it's something they're going to have to deal with that, I'm assuming, at some stage. And Sister Helen has said that the grief centre, we expect to get so busy, once this pandemic has passed, because a lot of children have been left without that support.
I saw a lovely picture of yourself and the boys, Tony and Dan, in the paper over the weekend. Olive, how are they doing now? They look great, fine strapping fellas.
they're strapping fellas. Well, I've some well fed. Somebody said I need a little box to stand on because I'm like this little older sister in the middle of the unit. That's what she said to me yesterday. Yeah, they're doing fine. I think this lockdown has really tested our mental health, and for two. Tom will be 13 soon, and Tony will be 16 soon. They're two teenage boys, and it is difficult for them. But I mean, so far so good. They're getting through it. They're busy with school, and we've a big garden, and they can play, and they do get out, and but there's no question, but it is difficult. They're really looking forward to getting back, and they love rugby, and they're in school inside in St. Munchin's, and it's Junior Cup is all they're interested in. So Tony especially has missed out on that this year because he's convinced they were going to win it, of course, this year.
and David, just on that, as time goes on, how important is it to continue the supports and to keep monitoring how children in a grief situation are doing in a bereavement process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, even acknowledging that it is a process is helpful. I think sometimes we do think of grief as an event, and it certainly isn't that. And that means that people and children are going to move through that process, at different speeds and in different ways. And I mean, there are, perhaps things that we might look out for in terms of just, the strength of their feeling at different stages, whether that be sadness or anger. Sometimes it can even be guilt, a feeling that that a child may feel that they did or didn't do something, before their loved one died. So there's a lot, I suppose, that can be there. And again, in most situations, though, we can adopt the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it," because we expect there to be strong feelings for children, and it's good that they express strong feelings. And in fact, our goal often is not necessarily to change anything about their feelings, but just to simply give them an opportunity to express them. I mean, I've heard Sister Helen speak before, and she talks even about the job they do in the grief centre, sometimes not necessarily being about counselling, but just being about listening. And I think that's central. That as a parent, when you're grieving yourself, of course, it's very difficult maybe to be open to the emotional world of your child at the same time, just because you're so overwhelmed and overloaded. But having other adults there to support you in allowing your kids to talk about their feelings is just, critically important. And then as time passes and you become better able to manage and regulate your own feelings, then, for you to be part of that, to continue to facilitate your children to talk. And who knows when that time is going to come. And often it's just, something will happen, or there'll be, something on the news that might trigger a memory or a thought. And it's about having that openness and willingness to talk when your children seem ready or want to talk about things.
Olive, do you recognise that when David talks about being overloaded at the time, and maybe just there not being enough of you to go around to deal with what you're going through yourself and then your own children?
Absolutely. The kids, I believe that Tony and Dan, especially after a few weeks, I mean, the first few weeks are such a blur, but after a few weeks, I know that the children would be elbowing each other going, "Oh, don't talk about Dad, it'll make Mum cry." That was the big thing. And that's where the centre comes in. I mean, you bring the children into the grief centre, they will talk about Dad till the cows come home inside there, because nobody's going to cry and they're able to express how they feel without upsetting Mum, because children do protect their mother. They don't want her to go down either. They need, and something happened here, and I don't think I'd say this, but I was on the couch. I'm going to say it was about 3 weeks after Auntie died, and I was on the couch, and I remember not even being somebody brought me in a glass of water, not even being able to take a sip of water. I was so thrown down, is the term I'm going to use, with grief. I could barely breathe. It was only shallow breathing. I remember Tony coming in. He was only 11 years old. He came in, he said, "Mom, you're on this couch all day." And I said, "Tony, I'm just so sad." And he said, "I know you're sad, Mom, and I'm sad, and so is Dan. But I don't know what's going to happen, Dan and I, if you're on the couch all the time." And it was like I got a bullet. I jumped up off the couch, and I never laid down and was miserable again. I just said, it's great that they were able to tell me, but I think that would have been a lot to do with the help from Sister Helen and just people being able to express themselves through another adult listening to them.
just really difficult listening to that.
But it's just about letting children feel the feelings and allowing them to know that whatever those feelings are, they're okay and they'll get through it.
All right, Dr. David Coleman, thank you as always. And Olive, it was lovely to talk to you. And the Children's Grief Centre is available to people on childrensgriefcentre.ie. I know they've a huge waiting list of over 300 children. We'll have to talk to Sister Helen. That's the next phone call we'll make after this programme, because she sounds wonderful. Olive, thank you so much for talking to us, and we wish all the best to yourself and Tony and Dan.
Thank you, Gail.
Text 51551 today with Claire Byrne on RTE Radio 1.